Well, one Australian company at least has come back from the brink in the last few months. Sigma Pharmaceuticals posted its first half results today under Managing Director Mark Hooper, a $26.7 million net profit. It's been a very responsible year for Sigma, having to sell its $900 million pharmaceuticals business to Aspen, leaving it with its wholesale business to pharmacies and retail outlets Amcal and Guardian. I spoke with Mark Hooper earlier. Mark Hooper, thank you for joining us.
That's a pleasure, Tikki.
Well, a very pleasing result, really. You had some analysts this time last year pretty much writing you off. How have you managed to turn things around?
Oh, look, it's been a pretty interesting journey over the last 12 months. What we've tried to do with the business is try and focus on the basics, and we've been fortunate enough to be able to deliver a 55% increase in profits with this result, and also a very strong cash flow result as well.
Presumably you've tightened up your inventory management a lot. You seem to be getting your working capital to working quite a lot harder for you. Again, how have you done this?
Oh, look, we have focused on all areas of working capital because in a business like ours, it's what makes up the majority of invested capital. So we focused on shortening payment terms for customers, trying to improve our inventory practices, and also trying to extend our supplier terms that had been shortened during the periods when we were having more financial difficulties in the early part of last year.
You, of course, lost the Pfizer business. Is that going to have any impact going forward? Because it did actually have an impact on the results to date, didn't it?
Well, no, Pfizer announced that they were going to move to an exclusive distribution system from February 1st this year, which means they don't go through the current full-line wholesalers. We immediately made moves to both lower our cost base, and we also lowered the level of discounts that we provide to our customers. So we have essentially fully compensated for the loss of the Pfizer business in our results for this half year.
On the other hand, 2 months ago, you managed to grab 10% of your rival Australian pharmaceutical industry's revenues. You're now the preferred supplier for another 300 pharmacies. How did you do that?
Oh, look, there was this relates to the Pharmacy Alliance Group. They had been a customer of API's for some time. They were the ones that made the decision that they wanted to tender their business across a number of wholesalers. We actually provided some interim services for them, and then were fortunate enough to be the successful tenderer. So, look, it's another great partnership for Sigma, and we were obviously really pleased to be able to take that on.
As I say, it's also at a time when you're trying to get more control of your working capital, and presumably the terms for customers are becoming tougher, and yet you've still been able to hold on to pharmacies.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, my experience is as long as you apply an economically rational approach, you can still have a very successful working partnership with pharmacy, even if sometimes that means you've got to make changes that are potentially negative for your customers. You know, we both want to have successful and strong businesses, both at a pharmacy and a wholesaler level. And as I say, as long as you've got a good working relationship, then I think those changes can still be well managed.
You warned today about the impact of the PBS reforms. We look like we're going to have a shrinking PBS. What sort of change could that mean for Sigma?
Well, look, the government's announced that there's a minimum of 23% drop for generic drugs in April next year. Based on the work we've done, if you assume that the PBS would have normally grown by around 5 to 6%, we think that makes PBS growth more likely to be either flat or slightly negative. And I guess for Sigma's business, PBS growth is the main driver of what happens to our revenue. So it probably means for 2012 our revenues are likely to be more flat than they have been historically. The point I was making today when we presented to the market was that because we have made significant improvements to the business, because we now have a strong balance sheet, we are much better placed to be able to deal with those challenges. It may ultimately mean that we need to look at our customer discount structures again, but if we need to do something like that, we'll also look at other measures we can do with our pharmacist customers to try and offset that impact.
I mean, there are some big changes. You've got now the Cabinet considering drugs that have been recommended from the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, and also reports that even the Health Minister has told the industry that new drugs will not be listed unless offsetting savings can be found. Is that true?
Look, I don't know about the specifics of that case. I think what you can say generally is The government, because it's got a particularly tight budget position anyway, and secondly because an ageing population is an increasing user of healthcare services, is always going to be focused on areas where it's providing the bulk of funding. I think the PBAC system has worked really well in terms of getting drugs listed in Australia and going through a thorough review process. So I don't know that the current changes are actually an efficient amendment to that, but the fact that the government's looking for changes generally in terms of trying to slow down the rate of growth in their healthcare expenditure, I think is probably going to be a reasonably constant feature of the landscape from here on in.
Well, nice that you've had a healthy year, Mark Hooper. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Tikki.